story went nationwide a few months ago with ABC News. There's an awesome news reporter that shared our story nationwide, and they got so much feedback. And our story is also shared on Univision nationwide, which is a Latin, well-known, I guess you'd say like TV station, news station. And that was awesome because that also went nationwide recently. I've had meetings with three lawmakers in Nevada, and we just hope to continue to raise awareness and fight for changes together with organizations and families and attorneys.
So, since we last spoke, I know that things have improved since you were going through it. So, you mentioned you've met with lawmakers. What's some of the changes that either you're trying to get done or some of the changes that you'd like to see get done so this situation doesn't happen to you again or someone else out there?
Yes, the topic of this situation is medical misdiagnosis and how it's affecting children and families nationwide and worldwide. And we went through a similar situation with my son. At about when he was born, we noticed that his head was getting larger than normal since birth. And then he was having some symptoms. He was vomiting and just something didn't seem right. So we kept taking him to the doctors and they kept misdiagnosing him with a stomach bug. And at about 5 months old, his pediatrician said, "Hey, just take him to the children's hospital to have images and he should be fine, but we just want to do it like as a precaution type thing." So my children's father took him to the children's hospital. They took images and then he called me because I had to be at home with my other son. And he just said they found fluid in his head and they're trying to say that he was abused. They're trying to say it was shaken baby syndrome, which he knew that I would never hurt our children and I knew he would never hurt our children. So we were just shocked and completely heartbroken to hear something so devastating. And the children's hospital didn't listen to us. No one, like none of the doctors or nurses or staff would listen to us. They just went with abuse and that was it. CPS showed up in the hospital as my baby was about to have serious neurological surgery. And they interrogated us. And, we kept saying, our son was never hurt. So they just treated us like we were criminals ever since that day. CPS did, the doctors, the nurses. It was just a horrible situation to see your baby go through such a, heartbreaking medical condition and then to be wrongfully accused of hurting your child. It's completely devastating and shocking. At about So my son had a serious neurological surgery, and then a few weeks later, the fluid reaccumulated, and he had to have a second neurological surgery to have an internal VP shunt placed, is to help drain the fluid. So that was concerning for me, as his mother. I'm like, okay, why does he have this chronic condition? And all they told me was they don't know. So I'm like, okay, you don't know why he has a chronic condition, but you're trying to say he's abused. This makes no sense at all. So then, see, a few months later, I noticed CPS was starting to get a little more aggressive with me because I told them I'm going to take my son to see different doctors and I will find out his correct diagnosis. And a few months later, that's when it seemed like everything shifted and they were getting more aggressive with me because they knew I was taking him to see other doctors. And we went to visit family in Oklahoma and they told CPS Texas called CPS Oklahoma and said her children are in immediate danger. Take them right now. So CPS Oklahoma stepped in and they did their own investigation. It was a 3-hour investigation. They met with me, met with family. I gave them access to my son's medical records. And she said, I deem your children safe. So then CPS Texas did not listen to them. And they still illegally crossed state lines and just with the sheriffs. So they lied and falsified court documents in the courthouse and with the judge in Texas. And then they crossed state lines into Oklahoma. And again, they lied and falsified court documents, lied to the judge in Oklahoma. And they showed up with the sheriffs and they just ripped my children out of my arms. And, when sheriffs are showing up with their guns and their badges, and they're threatening, like it's such a horrible situation because the sheriff threatened my cousin and I that were there, and he told us, if you get involved anyway, in any way, you will be arrested. So it's just such a horrible feeling as a parent to just see see them just rip your children out of your arms and take them, there's absolutely nothing you could do to stop this from happening, and is completely illegal. um, it took my children were placed in the foster care system for 5 months, and they were denied the right to stay with family. CPS would not allow my children to stay with family, and that was a violation of their federal and state laws. Children are supposed to be placed with family, but we're finding that they're often placed in foster care, and it's not right, and it's violating their civil rights under the United States Constitution. They also wrongfully charged my children's father with 2 serious felonies, and we had to go to court to fight to get our children back. He had to go to court to fight for his innocence, and we had to sell our house to pay for the mounting attorney fees. It was just like a horrible, horrible situation. And it took 5 months to get my sons back. I lost them for 150 days while they're in the foster care system. We had to hire 3 attorneys and a fourth attorney for him for criminal court to fight for his innocence. And it was just such a horrible situation that even many years later, we're still trying to heal from, the emotional trauma. It's families that go through a situation. These are lifelong scars that they try to heal from. And going through this situation, you tend to feel alone and that no one else is going through it. So it took a few years for me to connect with other organizations, families, and attorneys. And I'm finding that this is happening so often in pretty much every county and every state all across the United States, and in other countries like Canada, Sweden, France, India, Norway. It's happening everywhere, and it's a huge problem. And it's really devastating because they're violating our children's civil rights. My son's first, fourth, and 14th amendments were violated under the United States Constitution. It took about 2.5 years for me to get the correct diagnosis for my son. A medical expert actually said that he had a birth injury and a condition called benign external hydrocephalus. And I ended up finding out that the hospital that he was born at knew he had a birth injury, and they did not tell us, and they hid it from us. And then I found out that that children's hospital knew my son had hydrocephalus. They never told us, and instead they lied and made a false report to CPS of child abuse. And this is just, it's so heartbreaking and sad that this is just mass destruction of people's lives, and the children are being hurt. The emotional trauma for a child to be ripped from their parents' arms and to be placed with strangers in the foster care system, it's so completely heartbreaking and devastating for the children. And say there's about 500,000 children in foster care, if not more. Studies have shown the Children's Bureau did an investigation, or they wrote a report, and they said about 91% of these child abuse claims that are being reported are found to be false and unsubstantiated. 91%. And that's a huge concern. Also, I found that only 35% of families are getting their children back. They're actually terminating parental rights and adopting the children out, and they lose their children forever. So these are, huge concerns that I just hope and pray that lawmakers in every single state will start fighting for our families and our children all across the nation and worldwide. This is just a huge problem, and we need our lawmakers to help fight for us and to fight for our rights.
Lorena, if I may mention something, is you did a fantastic recap of that and everything that you've gone through. And when I initially heard your story, it was intriguing to me as someone, even though I don't have children, I looked at it as I can't believe someone would go through something like this because I've seen so many things when it comes to American news and American lawmakers where a lot of parents feel and think that there's this struggle between the state and themselves when it comes to the children. And as you mentioned, right, like you have a lot of parents who are having their children taken away from them, but they actually don't get them back. So when you're when you're speaking to some of these other people who've gone through this in different parts of the world, like Norway, like India, different parts of America, Canada, where I'm from, were you surprised at how many other people are going through something similar to you?
Yes, when I first found that information out, I was really shocked. But now, like years later, it doesn't surprise me at all because I hear about it so often. And so many families are contacting me. It's really sad because it seems like the state, like the government agencies, CPS, DHS, whatever called, it seems like they're targeting families that don't have money to fight for themselves. Because I spoke with my cousin that's an attorney in California when this first happened, and she told me, "I know you guys would never hurt your kids at all. You hire your own attorneys and you fight this." So I'm so glad that she told me that because many families don't know how to navigate this huge process. And it seems like the system is set up for people to fail because the state has unlimited resources and funding, and the families and the children, some people are on very limited income. They're struggling to, make ends meet. How do you have 80 to hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire attorneys to fight for yourself in court? Lots of families don't have this opportunity. So I've been really hoping and praying that we could somehow help families someday because this is a huge problem.
Do you think you'll ever reach the point where there would be attorneys that work specifically to help families through this time? Just because, as you mentioned, if you're being targeted, if you're a lower income or a lower middle class family, it's going to be difficult for you to be able to navigate the court systems and pay these fees because one, not everyone has a house to sell to
Right.
finance this battle, and two, not everyone has maybe the resources, the time, and let's be honest, the courage, right? Because you're devastated that your family has been taken away from you and now you're rushing around thinking of what am I going to do next? Do you foresee attorneys taking this on and saying that, hey, our firm is dedicated to fight for the families to get their children back?
Yes, there is a firm in Texas. I forget the name of it right now, but it's with attorney Dennis Slate. He's doing an amazing job fighting for families. Now he has an association with a few families a few attorneys that are helping other families. But I just wish there could be an attorney like him in every single state and all over in other countries because I'm finding, when families are talking to me, because so many have contacted me, it seems like some of the attorneys, most of them don't know how to navigate the system, or families don't realize that sometimes everyone's in it with each other because, if you think about it, the judge, the attorney, CPS, they're all seeing each other all the time. So they're friends. And it's a huge conflict of interest that the child abuse pediatrician is also getting paid by the state because they're funded through them. So it's really concerning how the system is set up and how it works because so many families are being devastated by losing their children. Like I can't even explain the pain of having your children taken from you. It feels like someone passed away and it's this huge deep pain in your heart as a parent that it's just I can't even explain it. But that's why I use that pain to into purpose. I try to turn my pain into purpose and to try to help other families because I know exactly what they're going through and the pain of not having their children every day. And what the children are going through too. This is so devastating for the children, especially as well.
I think so as well, right? Like you have the parents, for the most part, have the emotional tools to at least continue forward. The children, and a lot of times, as you mentioned, right, it happens very young, and they may not have the emotional strength, emotional maturity, let alone the mental health maturity or the mental fitness to go through. And I couldn't imagine being 2, 3, 4 years old and someone who is relatively a stranger, right? CPS, police, coming to your home, taking you away from all that you've known, all that you're comfortable with, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, because many times it could be just a misunderstanding, or many times it could be some confusion. But it seems to be over the last, at least my observation, the last number of years, where it's like, okay, the parents are bad because that's what we think. We remove them, and then the parents are doing extraordinary things just to get them back or just to be in contact with them. And I know that you're living your life after all of this, but has it still been difficult to live the type of life that you want, knowing that this happened to your family not that long ago?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey towards like healing from it because the emotional trauma, PTSD, all the pain that parents are experiencing through this situation, it takes years to heal from, and these are lifelong impacts that affect families for the rest of their lives. It doesn't completely go away. It's like if you hurt your leg really bad and you have this limp forever that will never go away. It's like that, like a scar and pain in your heart that'll never completely go away. Um, One of the things that you mentioned is that I remember you said that you don't have a child, but someday if you do have a child, or if you have family and friends that have children, it's really concerning because no one's child is safe until we have changes within the system. I have a friend in Florida. She's contacted me a few times. It actually happened to her as well. And then she has contacted me a few times and she's like, "Hey, my friend's going through this too." So it's happening a lot more often than we think of. Even my cousin that's an attorney, she's like, "Hey, my friend is going through this." And then she's in Florida, connecting me with her, and then her friends are going through it too. So it's happening a lot more often than people are aware of. And I thank you so much for helping me raise that awareness because people need to know that this is a huge problem and people need to unite and fight for changes together.
I agree, and it's scary. Even and you made a good point. Like I would want to have children someday, and I don't know how I would function if I was put in that situation. But the blessing is that if it were to happen to me, I at least spoke to someone that has experienced it. They can
Mhm.
share their tips. They can share what they did. They can share what they wish they knew back then. And so they can maneuver better. Whereas, like for you, it sounds like it was totally new, totally caught off guard. And you're like, oh my God, what is it that I'm going to do? Like, how far do you want to take the awareness of what you went through, what other people are going through? When it comes to not only where you're living, but across the world.
Yeah. Like me personally, I couldn't sleep at night knowing that children and families are suffering so horrifically from the system. I cannot. And then it's like if know, it's kind of like the situation, like if you see someone being hurt on the street, like say you're walking down the street and you see people like hurting them physically, would you not try to stop and help, call for help, or would you just keep walking? That's what it feels like with me. I'm like, can't, I can't stand by and just like turn the other way and know that people are suffering, especially children, and not do anything to try to help fight for change. In Texas, I shared my testimony at a legislative hearing, and I've had meetings with several lawmakers there. And it took 2.5 years for organizations, families, and us to help get a law passed that will allow parents a second opinion. It's SB 1578, and I hope that that can be a federal law someday, all throughout the United States and worldwide. And what happened with our situation was I told the children's hospital, when everything first started with the wrongful accusations, I told them, he's never been hurt in any way. Can we have a second opinion? And they said, no, we don't feel that's necessary. So families are being denied a second opinion. It's crazy that you would even need a law for something like that, but they deny a second opinion, take your children, put them in foster care, and then you have no control of them getting a second opinion or not. It's just what they say goes. And then they have their own child abuse pediatrician, you have your medical experts, and usually it seems like the judge seems to side with the state. So it feels like so many odds are stacked up against families that are going through this situation, and it's not right.
Especially when you made the connection, right? Like you have some of these players in this game, for lack of a better term, right? Like you have the pediatrician, you have the attorneys who are of the state. They're aware of these people, they're aware of each other, they're aware of the judge, they know each other, right? So some are friendly, some may be even friends. And the fact that you can only have the one opinion, it's like, okay, if I were to get a second opinion and that second opinion is contrary to the first opinion,
Yeah.
would that automatically mean that the child goes back to the parent? And it seems in the situation, they're like, well, we're not even going to give you a second opinion. This is the opinion which, as you pointed out, right, usually sides with the state and they take the person away. And then
Yeah.
the parents, if they're innocent, they're jumping through all these hoops,
Yeah.
but some of it requires a law to be changed. And by the time the law gets changed, how many children's childhood are lost, how many parents bond to their children are lost, right?
Yeah, this is complete mass destruction of people's lives. Like people have, you don't really realize everything that's involved. You lose your children, you lose your home because you have to sell it. People are losing their jobs, their careers. My children's father had a top secret government and military security clearance. Both of us had clean records, no prior CPS involvement. And still no one would listen to us. They just listened to this doctor that's like, oh, I think this might be abuse, but might not. Well, that's the thing though, too, is I told the pediatric neurosurgeon at the hospital, I was like, look, my son has never been hurt in any way. Could this be something else as in a medical condition? And he said, yes, but since he's a baby and can't talk, we're just going to go with abuse. And we walked away. And it's just like, if this were his life, I highly doubt he'd be, um, handling the situation that way. If this was a CPS caseworkers that were on, our case, if this were their lives and their children, I highly doubt, and the judge, the attorneys that, know the judge and are on the opposite side trying to fight against you, I highly doubt they would be handling the situation in that way.
I wonder
It's not
where
their
the dis
lives, so it just doesn't
Yeah, I
seem like they
wonder where
care.
the disconnect is, right? Like as you mentioned, like what if it was them in that situation?
Yeah.
Or could there be possibly as a compromise, they put the resources out there in plain black and white English saying that if your child was ever taken away, or if you suspect that your child is being taken away for reasons that aren't valid, you can do this, this, and this. But currently, it seems through the work of what you're doing and the awareness that you're raising, is that they don't have those tools to let you know. It's pretty much you have to figure it out, and the longer it takes, the more damage that happens to the bond between the parents, or the child.
Yes, exactly. And something I realized as well is before I went to this situation, and maybe you as well, like whenever you hear something like, oh, this parent abused their child and it's in the news, I always believed it was true. And then I always believed, oh, CPS is out there helping children that are being abused. But when I personally went through this situation, it made me take a step back and think, okay, when I hear about that stuff, I'm like, are the children really being abused, or are they wrongfully accusing that parent too? It makes me think more about like, okay, and then now seeing as how I personally dealt with CPS for a whole year and how they tried to destroy our lives and take our children, now I'm seeing the bad side of that system, and it's very questionable. Like, why are 91% of children why are these reports coming out that all these abuse claims, 91% of them are found to be false and unsubstantiated? People need to start asking questions, and I hope that people can unite and fight for changes together, because it seems like it's just getting much worse. I've had some people contact me, and they're going through a similar situation from the exact same hospital. So it's very concerning that this is continuing to happen, and it seems like it's just getting much worse over time.
I think there would need to be a complete overhaul of the perception of that. Like, because a lot of times when news gets reported, initially the headline is so intriguing, it's so inviting, because it baits you in, right? It's like
Yeah,
woman and husband found abusing their child. You're like, oh my God, how can parents do that? But
yeah,
then when you read into the article, you begin to see that, okay, they didn't necessarily abuse them, there's a suspicion of it. But then when they're found innocent, you don't ever get that article.
yeah, exactly. And something too to think about is like, this is what I was thinking about. I'm like, how come this information has been kept from us for so many years? Like, think about that. Have I seen, I even thought about that myself. I'm like, have I seen these stories in the news where people are being misdiagnosed with, children are being misdiagnosed with abuse? They're charging the parents. No, for many years we haven't seen these stories. And it makes you very concerned as to why. Maybe if people don't know this is a huge problem, then they can't fight for changes. But now I'm so thankful that in the past few years, these stories are starting to come out. People Magazine shared some stories about some families, and I'm seeing them pop up now. And it's good that the truth is finally starting to surface. So that way it can help us fight for change to help protect children and families.
I think many people are so quick to, want to protect children, and rightfully so. Like children are very vulnerable in a lot of situations, but they don't consider what if it's not true,
Yeah.
right? Because I think every parent or every person should understand that for every person that's falsely accused of something or just accused, and for them to be determined to be innocent of that accusation or for the charges to be beaten, they would have to look at it as, you know what, that could be me. And I don't think there's enough of that. And
Exactly.
you're right. And you raise a
Yep.
good point where you used to read articles, oh my God, like this person is being abused. And then when you went through it, you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yep.
Maybe there's the other side where it is completely not true. And I think if more people would read the news with your lens that you just described, I think it would be less shock value and there'd be less false reporting, at least in the media,
Mhm.
because no one wants to be labeled um a child molester, a child abuser, or anything of that nature, right? Because that's something that's going to stay with you for a very long time to some people,
Mhm.
regardless of what the decision is. Have you faced some of that where you still feel that you're fighting the situation, even though you've been proven that it hasn't been true?
I don't because in my heart, I know the truth of what happened, and I have so much evidence and documentation to prove that what we went through is true. It's hard because people can't grasp how much this devastates your entire life, and then dealing with the aftermath of that situation. And I'm so thankful for you and your awesome podcast that you keep it real and you tell the truth, and it's like real raw like situations people are going through. And that's what we need is more people like you and your amazing podcasts and the news stations. Like tell the truth, speak about things that are really happening. And people will gravitate towards that because they can relate to it. Like so many families that are when I start sharing your amazing podcasts on my social media, they'll start gravitating towards your podcast too because so many families have been going through this and it helps create this huge awareness. What happens when we share a story in the news and the media and through podcasts is it helps add steam and traction to much needed changes within the system. Like what happened in Texas, the news station and the Houston Chronicle, they exposed this huge broken system. And then the lawmakers that I've had meetings with, they're like, the news did expose a huge problem within our system, and we are trying to fight to change it. And it takes a while. I've had meetings with many lawmakers in many states, and they're like, we understand you're asking us to pass, have a law passed, but do you know the process of that? And I'm like, yeah, it took 2.5 years to have a law passed in Texas. Can we get started now? Because we know it takes time. But that's what we need is we need that passion from these lawmakers to help fight for families and children. And I don't think that there's that connection yet where they really, because honestly, this can't happen to a lawmaker or someone that works in their office because the way the system works, it probably won't happen because they know who they are and who they work for. But if they can just put themselves in other families' shoes and think, man, what if this happened to me and my children? I think that would help get lawmakers on board to help fight for changes. Because I've had many meetings with lawmakers, and some of them just don't choose not to do anything, or they have so many other bills and laws that they need passed. But if they could put themselves in our shoes and with their own children and think, man, what if this happened to me and my children? How would I feel? Would I not be doing what she's trying to do in other organizations trying to fight for change to try to protect our children and families? Because it's very concerning. There's about like 500,000, if not more, children in foster care right now, 91% of them shouldn't be there. 91%, because that report from the Children's Bureau said 91% of these abuse claims are found to be false and unsubstantiated. And that's why we fight for changes is to help protect the children from this and the parents and caregivers. I found that lots of parents and caregivers are actually being wrongfully convicted. I know a mother right now in Tennessee, her name is Tanya. She has been wrongfully convicted and she's in prison right now for 16 years. And her family is suffering without her. She has two small children and her husband, and it's so sad to see the devastation in this whole family, especially her. Can you imagine being in prison for 16 years and you're in fact innocent? You were wrongfully convicted because your attorney didn't fight for you and court didn't do a good enough job. So now she's sitting in prison for the next 16 years and she's in fact innocent. Which breaks my heart is like how many other people are in jail and prison right now and they're in fact innocent. And how many children are sitting in the foster care completely with a huge emotional trauma that'll affect them for the rest of their lives. And they're sitting in foster care right now for months and years. And they're being adopted out to non-family members. And these parents are losing their children forever. And the children never get to see their parents again. And they're in fact, and the parents did nothing wrong. There's something, there's the system is very broken and it needs to be fixed. And I'm so thankful for all the organizations, families that are fighting, and attorneys that are fighting for changes. So thankful for your awesome podcast for bringing this huge awareness in the news and the media, because that's what we need. We need to unite and fight for changes together. Because if we don't, no one's children are safe until this huge problem is solved.
Yes, absolutely. You have some people that they can't see the pain that this caused because they're suffering what I like to call "it won't happen to me" syndrome.
Yeah.
Right? Like they see these things like, well, that would never happen to me. Well, it may not happen to you, but it may happen to someone you know, it may happen to a family member. And it's sad to see and it's sad to hear that the alternative is foster care. And you hear so many stories about foster care and the transition because at least here in Canada, it's usually the child will go to a family member before
Yeah,
it
that's how
goes
it's
to
supposed to
someone
be.
that isn't. Yeah, and I think that's where
That's how
there's a
it's
little bit
supposed
of a
to be.
struggle, right? Like sometimes you
But
have
they don't
people
always follow
that,
that.
yeah, you're right. Like they don't always follow that, and I wonder why that is. Like I know you mentioned it's supposed to be that way. Is it a little different in the States, or it's exactly that way where it goes to the family first, then someone else?
In the States, I've noticed that there are federal and state laws where children are supposed to be placed with family. But I spoke with an attorney that used to be a judge, and he said, we are finding that CPS is not placing children with family. They're just placing them in foster care. And then it makes, if you think about it, like from the outside looking in, it makes it easier for them to terminate parental rights and adopt the children out when they're already in foster care and try to adopt them out to the foster parents because oh they now they have a bond with them. You know, it's the system is very broken. And I'm so thankful that in Canada they at least place them with family. Sometimes they are placing children with family in the United States, but we're finding most of the time they don't. They just go directly in foster care. Just like with my children. I went to a team meeting with my attorneys and CPS in their office, in CPS office. I'm like, why are my children in foster care when I have 15 family members here right now that could take care of my children? They gave me no answer. And they still kept my children in foster care for 150 days. The system is very broken. CPS has so much power and authority. They could get away with anything and whatever happens to them. Whatever happens to them. Are they ever charged with felonies because they're wrongfully charging parents with abuse? Are they ever charged with anything for illegally taking children from their parents and falsifying court documents and lying to the judge? When do we ever see CPS caseworkers held accountable for what they're doing wrong? Don't.
That's a fantastic question. Right? Like if
Like
you take
use
away someone's child, that is considered kidnapping, right? That's entrapment. That there's so many crimes that it could be named. Falsifying records, that's a crime as well. So you can stack it and stack it and stack it, but I'm wondering if it falls under some type of jurisdiction where it's like they're authorized to take children out of the house because the child's protection supersedes what we may think as of crime.
well, they have an abuse of power. Like they're so powerful, they could pretty much do anything and get away with it. Well, when I was in a legislative hearing with a lawmaker, he was actually asking CPS. He's like, "Hey, what happens to CPS caseworkers when they get it wrong?" He's like, "Oh, they could be charged with misdemeanors." This was the top person in charge of CPS in Texas. He's like, "Oh, they could be charged with misdemeanors," and he's like, "How often does that happen?" And he was quiet. He's like, "Yeah, it usually doesn't happen." So it's very concerning. You know, law enforcement. There's only if law enforcement does something, if they hurt someone, they're held accountable. They even have those cameras. You know, it'd be awesome if CPS caseworkers had those cameras so that they could be held accountable for what they're doing, especially when they're illegally taking children. But it's just, I was told by my attorney, he said, people in jail and prison have more rights than children do. And I'm like, what? How is that possible? He's like, because they have so much time on their hands. They're fighting and having all these laws to protect, they're having all these laws passed to protect themselves. And what laws do we have for children to protect our children? There aren't that many. If we did, we have these amendments that are supposed to protect us, but all of that was thrown out the window when we went through that situation. They illegally took my children. They illegally crossed state lines, took my children, violated their first, fourth, and 14th amendments under the United States Constitution. And whatever happened to them? Nothing. We did file a lawsuit back in April, I believe. Yes, in April, we filed a federal lawsuit against the child abuse pediatrician that misdiagnosed my son with abuse, against the children's hospital that allowed this to happen, and against several CPS caseworkers and the director of CPS. And we're finding that these lawsuits are taken more seriously in the federal court system than in the state court system.
Would that be your next step to take it to the federal level?
Yes, we did file a federal lawsuit.
Okay. Because I guess based on what you're saying, that's probably the best next course of action because not only are you working on the law side to get the laws changed, you're also working with other families, other groups that are doing that, as well as you're doing the lawsuit. So it looks like you have a lot of things in motion to make sure that if the situation does arise, we get it right more often than we get it wrong.
Yes, hopefully that's what we're hoping and praying for. It's really sad because the situation seems like it's just getting much worse over time than better.
So as we close, Lorena, what advice do you want to give for families out there who are raising their young children who listen to you, listen to your story, and they want to maybe safeguard themselves from this ever happening to them?
Yeah, honestly, I never thought this situation would have ever happened to us until it did. And so many other families are saying the same thing. And it's happening to doctors, nurses, people in the military, in the government, teachers, firefighters, paramedics. It can easily happen to anyone at any time. And the more information and wisdom and knowledge that people have to try to navigate this system, the better, because this can literally happen to anyone at any time. If your child falls and breaks a bone, they could be wrongfully accused of abuse when they're innocent. If your child has a birth injury and the hospital doesn't tell you anything, they could take your kids and wrongfully accuse you of abuse and charge you with some serious felonies. Like this can easily happen to anyone at any time. And just people need to be aware and unite and fight for change together. And I'm so happy that I'm finally starting to really see that. I see like lots of advocates nationwide, attorneys, organizations, and we're all connecting worldwide. It's amazing. I was in a meeting the other day with people in different countries, Sweden, France, Canada, United States. It's awesome to see people unite together and fight for changes. And there are some doctors that are starting to get involved in our fight for change as well. They didn't know this is a huge problem. And someone contacted me and they're like, hey, there's this doctor that wants to join this fight for change. I'm like, that's amazing. Thank you. It's just awesome to see everyone unite and fight for change together because we have that passion to try to protect the children. And we understand that abuse happens and we're strongly against children or anyone being abused in any way. But this is an abuse of power by CPS and everyone else that's involved. When there's clear signs that a child is being abused, yes, step in and help them. But with my son, he never had any signs of abuse on him at all. No bruises, nothing. They found fluid in his head, yes, but he had a birth injury and a condition called benign external hydrocephalus. And we're finding that babies are often, like misdiagnosed with abuse easier because they can't speak and say, hey, I was never abused. It's a baby. So it seems like that's the target is babies are easier to take away and misdiagnose with abuse because they can't even speak and say their parents never abused them. And it's not right. Like this can easily happen to anyone at any time. But the more information that we have and knowledge to give families to help them in this situation, if it ever happens, the better. And this can easily happen to your friends or your family, just like with me. My cousin in California said, hey, my friend in Florida is going through this. And then her friend in Florida knows other families that are going through this. it's so crazy that this is happening far too often than people are aware of.